Hey guys, tonight we slip into the hidden world of Japan's covert samurai, where the moon slices through the mist like a silver blade and shadows cling to every corner. You probably want to survive this if you're reimagining yourself strolling casually through history. These weren't polite warriors with shiny armor posing for Instagram. No, these were the people who moved unseen, whose footsteps left no trace, whose very existence was whispered in fear and awe. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, post your location and local time. It makes me feel like we're sneaking through history together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture yourself in a narrow alleyway in feudal Japan. Rain slicks the cobblestones, the scent of wet pine mingling with the faint tongue of smoke from distant hearths. You trudge silently, senses heightened, aware that anyone or nothing might be watching. That sense of being hunted and hunter at once is the heartbeat of the hidden samurai, the shinobi. Their world wasn't built for parades or honor on the battlefield. No, it was designed for shadows, deception, and survival. Historians still argue whether ninja were the mythic ghosts that tales suggest or skilled, but mundane spies exaggerated over centuries. Either way, you feel the weight of centuries pressing against your shoulders, a faint thrill that maybe, just maybe, someone is tracking you in the dark. And the reality? These shadow warriors didn't get dramatic entrances or heroic duels. They got damp clothing, freezing nights, the occasional poisonous bug for practice, and an endless stream of just don't get caught. A fringe tidbit to chew on while your mind drifts. Some accounts say young trainees were made to walk barefoot across frozen streams to learn patience, balance, and pain tolerance. A kind of early winter survival boot camp. Imagine that next time you complain about a cold shower. As you continue forward, you notice the rooftops, jagged and slippery, a playground for a different kind of warrior. Every crack and ridge is a potential path. That creaking signboard above the noodle shop? Maybe it's a resting spot, maybe a trap. The ordinary becomes extraordinary in this world. Shadows stretch unnaturally long, whispering the secret life of Japan beyond the castle walls. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen you read about once? Yeah, those sorts of odd, almost laughable remedies weren't for everyday townsfolk. They were part of the lore of survival and fear, passed down in secret scrolls and oral stories, sometimes true, sometimes exaggerated. You trudge past a lantern, its light flickering, your heartbeat sensing with the soft hum of insects and the distant splash of river water. In your imagination, every shadow could be a shinobi, every gust of wind a signal, every reflection a message. They thrived in the liminal spaces, alleys, rooftops, forests, where most people never ventured. Their existence was whispered, feared, and envied. And tonight, as you step into this narrative, you begin to sense why. The thrill isn't just in danger. It's in invisibility, in being everywhere and nowhere, in walking a line between legend and reality. So as your eyes adjust to the dim glow of history, remember, you're not merely observing. You are moving alongside these shadow warriors. Feel the rain soak through your kimono. Hear the distant footsteps that may or may not be following you, and realize that the ordinary Japan of market sellers and samurai parades hides another layer. This is the world of those who lived unseen, whose stories are fragments and whispers, whose deeds were dangerous, mundane, and sometimes downright peculiar. Historians still argue whether they were entirely factual or the product of overactive imagination. But for tonight, let's walk in their footsteps anyway, because in doing so, you are part of the legend, if only for a moment. You trudge deeper into the mist, past the flickering lanterns of a sleepy village, and feel the past pressing against you like damp paper. The origins of the shinobi aren't carved into stone or neatly written in royal records. They are whispered in shadowed corners, buried in the footnotes of Japanese history. Some say their beginnings trace back to rural provinces like Iga and Koga, regions of dense forests and steep hills that offered natural cover for those willing to master secrecy. You probably think samurai and ninjas were the same. They weren't. Samurai clashed on open fields with honor-bound codes, but the earliest shinobi were local spies and scouts, often peasants or minor warriors who learned to survive outside formal battle lines. Historians still argue whether these clans formed spontaneously as self-protection groups or if they were systematically organized under local lords from the start. Either way, you can feel the pull of something secret, ancient, and slightly dangerous just a few steps away. Imagine training along narrow mountain paths, your feet slipping on mossy stones, while elders whisper instructions about silent movement, camouflage, and observation. You move as if the air itself might betray your presence, listening for the barely audible snap of a twig or the distant barking of a village dog. Fringe accounts suggest some shinobi were trained to imitate natural sounds, birds, frogs, even the rustle of a fox in leaves, to mask their approach. Sure, it sounds absurd, but when you consider how survival often relies on cunning, these oddities start to make sense. You might chuckle quietly, thinking, yeah, right, frog impersonation saves lives. But in this shadowed world, anything might be a tool or weapon. The evolution from rural scouts to highly organized operatives is another layer of intrigue. By the late 15th century, ninja clans were reportedly coordinating intelligence for daimyo regional warlords, sometimes rivaling the samurai in strategic importance. They weren't just sneaking around. They were gathering information, sabotaging enemy operations, and shaping outcomes from the shadows. And yet, these were not your heroic Hollywood-style assassins with invisibility cloaks. They were mostly ordinary people with extraordinary patience and an obsessive attention to detail. Historians still argue whether the tales of near-magical stealth were embellishments or practical exaggerations passed down through generations. Here is a quirky tidbit to keep in mind. Some early shinobi reportedly used hollowed-out walking sticks to carry letters, tiny poisons, or even miniature tools. You could laugh at the ingenuity, imagining a rogue trader in a straw hat, but in their context, this was practical espionage. Every object became potential equipment, every gesture a coded signal, and every glance could contain a message only the trained eye could read. You probably want to survive imagining all the tiny details they had to remember, but that's the allure. Step into this mental map. Forests that stretch endlessly, rivers that carve secrets into the earth, villages where the ordinary and extraordinary overlap. You begin to understand why these regions birth shadow warriors. Isolation bred ingenuity. Long-standing feuds and territorial disputes made secrecy valuable. Every narrow pass, every mountain cave, every hidden creek offered both refuge and opportunity. And you, wandering silent through this narrative, start to feel the rhythm of the shinobi's existence. Vigilance, patience, and an almost absurd dedication to being unseen. By the time you pause to catch your breath, the landscape has shifted from the mundane to the mysterious. You hear the rustle of leaves. It could be the wind or the shadow of someone trained to move like it. These origins, murky, debated, and occasionally hilarious, remind you that the world of the shinobi is built not on spectacle but on subtlety, on blending into what others overlook. Historians still debate how much of this early lore is factual and how much is myth-making, but the sensation of walking in these hidden footsteps is as real as the chill creeping down your spine. The mist thickens as you move along a narrow mountain trail, each step muffled by moss and fallen leaves. You trudge through the world of training and secrecy, where shinobi apprentices endured exercises that would make a modern obstacle course look like a casual stroll in the park. Imagine being barefoot in freezing rivers, balancing on slippery logs, or creeping over jagged rocks while carrying supplies heavier than you are. Pain, discomfort, and monotony weren't just accepted, they were tools for sharpening skill, patience, and mental resilience. You probably won't survive a single day here without cursing your ancestors. Yet there's a strange allure to imagining yourself moving like a shadow, unseen yet present, a whisper in the forest. Fringe tailies add spice to the reality. Some trainees supposedly walked across beds of nails or practiced stealth by lying in a pit of snakes, learning to control fear as much as movement. Yes, it sounds absurd, and part of you might think, this is torture, not training. But the idea wasn't cruelty, it was preparation. Fear is predictable. Training against it could make you unpredictable. Historians still argue whether such extreme methods were routine or the result of exaggerated anecdotes passed down in secret scrolls and oral tradition. Regardless, every discipline, from climbing walls silently to holding one's breath underwater, was a lesson in patience, control, and adaptability. Weapons practice was woven seamlessly into daily routines. You trudged through bamboo groves, practicing with short swords, throwing stars, and hidden blades, learning not just to strike, but to disappear. Some records mention apprentices balancing knives on their heads or tossing shuriken into targets while blindfolded. Oddly, it seems less about combat than about mastering precision, calm, and confidence in the unpredictable. Remember, these weren't gladiators performing for applause. They were preparing for missions where a mistake could mean death or dishonor. Mental conditioning matched physical rigor. You sit quietly in dark rooms, focusing on subtle sounds, water dripping, a distant fox's call, the shifting of shadows. Meditation and mindfulness were as crucial as climbing walls or dodging arrows. Fringe reports even suggest that some shinobi used scented powders or incense to hone scent tracking, training their noses to detect enemies or hidden paths. It may sound quirky, almost spa-like, yet it was deadly serious. Heightened senses equaled survival. Historians still debate how widespread these methods were, or if they're mostly romanticized. Imagine learning espionage games disguised as children's exercise is signal codes with hand gestures, invisible ink with plant extracts, or moving silently in village streets as if you belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. You probably won't survive picturing the discipline and boredom fused together. Yet there's an almost hypnotic rhythm to it. Training wasn't flashy. It was relentless repetition, observation, and adaptation, forming habits that became second nature. Every step, glance, or breath could be a test. By the end of a long, damp day, you sit on a rocky ledge, muscles sore, lungs burning, senses buzzing with every sound and movement in the forest. You start to understand why secrecy, patience, and skill were paramount. These shadow warriors weren't born with stealth. They earned it, bit by grueling bit, blending physical hardship with mental acuity. And though you might chuckle at the more bizarre elements, beds of nails, snake pits, or incense training, each oddity carries a kernel of truth about survival, adaptability, and the hidden genius of these silent operatives. The forest whispers around you, and for the first time, you realize training here wasn't just preparation. It was transformation. You step cautiously into a grove where the light filters in thin slivers, illuminating the glint of weapons half buried in leaves. Here, the shinobi's armory comes alive, a collection of unconventional tools designed not for display, but for survival, deception, and efficiency. You trudge past short swords, throwing stars, and concealed daggers, noting how some blades hide inside walking sticks, umbrellas, or even bamboo flutes. The cleverness isn't just in attacking. It's in remaining invisible, adaptable, and unpredictable. Historians still argue whether some of the more exotic gadgets, like exploding scrolls or spring-loaded traps, were practical tools or fantastical exaggerations of storytellers seeking to thrill audiences. Picture a tool so ordinary, it becomes extraordinary. A paper umbrella? That's a weapon. a fan, disguised metal edges for slashing. Even common household items could double as instruments of espionage. Fringe accounts claim some ninja used specially designed shoes to cling to slippery rooftops, or tiny climbing claws hidden in gloves to scale walls. It's hard to picture without grinning at the creativity. You probably won't survive trying to replicate it without ending in bruises. But in context, these tools were genius. Adaptability often meant life versus death. You reach a small clearing and examine shuriken, those iconic throwing stars that are often overhyped in movies. They weren't primarily meant to kill. Usually they distracted, wounded, or forced an opponent to shift attention. A quirky tidbit: some shuriken were shaped like leaves or bird feathers to blend into the environment when not in use, a sort of prehistoric camouflage. It's fascinating how elegance and utility fused into something so deceptively simple. Weapons weren't only about stealth. They were about psychological impact. A sudden flicker of a shuriken in the night, a whispering dart from a hidden hand, or the glint of a concealed blade could paralyze even seasoned warriors with uncertainty. Historians still debate how often ninja engaged in lethal combat versus reconnaissance and sabotage, but the fear they inspired was undeniably real. You trudge through that fear now, sensing how an ordinary village night could become a landscape of tension, where shadows carry threats unseen. Then there are the fringe gadgets: smoke bombs, miniature explosives, and ingenious traps. Some were made from common herbs, powdered minerals, or even animal bones, engineered to create confusion or diversion. You might smirk imagining someone tossing a smoke bomb flower into a courtyard, but it fits the pattern. Improvisation and ingenuity over brute force. Everyday items became extraordinary instruments of survival, and the creativity of these tools reminds you that the shinobi weren't relying on luck. They relied on imagination, intelligence, and relentless preparation. By the time you leave the grove, your mind buzzes with images of concealed weapons, impossible gadgets, and adaptive ingenuity. You probably won't survive imagining all the detail without a headache, but the takeaway is clear. Stealth isn't just movement. It's a mindset, a philosophy, and a toolkit. And as you move forward, the shadows themselves seem to hum with the echo of centuries of hidden skill, as if the trees remember the glint of blades and the soft footsteps of warriors who mastered both the ordinary and the extraordinary. The forest opens to a quiet valley, mist curling around bamboo stalks like ghostly fingers, and you trudge forward, feeling the weight of unspoken rules pressing against your shoulders. The code of the shadow warrior is a paradox: honor without recognition, loyalty without applause, and ethics that bend to necessity. Unlike samurai, whose bushido demanded visible courage and battlefield heroics, the shinobi's principles were subtle, whispered, and sometimes downright peculiar. You probably won't survive imagining all the contradictions, yet there's a beauty in it, a disciplined moral flexibility that kept them alive. Historians still argue whether these codes were widespread practice or romanticized ideals recorded long after the fact. Loyalty, above all, defined the shadow samurai. Service to a lord or clan often demanded secrecy, obedience, and a willingness to disappear without fanfare. Yet there were peculiar edicts in some training scrolls, like prohibitions against harming certain animals, including owls, because they were believed to be spirits of the dead or omens of misfortune. You might snort at the superstition, but these small rituals helped shape a mindset attuned to observation, caution, and respect for consequences. In a world where a single mistake could be fatal, even the tiniest distraction or ethical misstep could cost lives. The code extended beyond ethics into strategy. A shadow warrior had to master patience, deception, and subtlety while maintaining a form of personal honor. They were trained to strike only when necessary, to leave minimal trace, and to prioritize information over glory. Fringe sources suggest some shinobi memorized entire villages' layouts, household routines, and even seasonal shifts in wind patterns to optimize movement and avoid detection. You probably won't survive absorbing all that mental mapping in one go. But the point isn't the detail, it's the discipline. Psychological resilience was another pillar. You trudged through endless nights of surveillance, learning to endure monotony, cold, hunger, and isolation. Meditation, mindfulness, and ritual reinforced calmness under stress, preparing you for situations where every decision might tip the balance between life and death. Historians still debate how codified these practices were, or whether they evolved organically across clans. Yet their consistency across accounts hints at a shared philosophy. And humor wasn't absent. Some accounts describe pranks intended to teach vigilance. A trainee might find a straw dummy in a forest, only to realize it held a small weapon, or hear a creaking tree branch and discover a teacher observing every move. Quirky, yes, but every joke carried a lesson. Shadow warriors learned to blend the serious with the absurd, reinforcing adaptability while sharpening their senses. By the time night settles fully over the valley, you begin to grasp the paradox of these codes. They demanded invisibility, patience, cunning, and loyalty, yet offered no fame or reward beyond survival and skill. You probably won't survive the tension of walking these ethical tightropes yourself, but imagining it is enough to feel the pulse of the hidden samurai, their silent honor, their whispered rules, and the extraordinary discipline that made them legends in shadows rather than on banners. You trudge through a damp, narrow pass, mist curling around moss-covered stones, and suddenly the world seems to shrink, forcing you to notice every sound, every flicker of movement. Welcome to the realm of espionage and intelligence, where observation isn't optional, it's survival. Shadow warriors weren't merely silent killers. They were information-gathering machines, trained to see patterns where others saw chaos, to read behavior like an open scroll. You probably won't survive imagining the level of attention required, but in doing so, you step into a mindset that transforms ordinary senses into weapons. Historians still argue whether ninja intelligence truly rivaled formal samurai espionage, or if the stories are amplified legend. Picture yourself crouched in a rain-drenched alley, eyes adjusting to flickering lantern light, ears tuned to the faintest footfalls. You watch as merchants haggle over rice, unaware that every exchange, gesture, and whispered phrase could carry critical information. Fringe accounts even suggest that some ninja trained birds to deliver messages or signal movements using natural sounds to mask human activity. You might laugh at the idea of carrier pigeons and war geese, but clever improvisation was central to shadowcraft. Disguises played a pivotal role. You imagine walking through villages as a traveling merchant, a monk, or even a street performer, blending into the environment while gathering intelligence unnoticed. Some texts describe the use of false identities maintained for weeks, complete with behavior patterns, speech mannerisms, and social networks designed to avoid suspicion. Every day was an exercise in improvisation, creativity, and subtle observation. Historians still debate how extensive these disguises truly were, and whether they were primarily practical or exaggerated in legend. You probably won't survive processing the mental acuity required to memorize entire households, track schedules, and map secret paths, but that was standard operating procedure. Shadow warriors used rudimentary coded signals, marks on trees, scratches in mud, or dropped objects in precise locations. Even the rhythm of footsteps could convey messages. Fringe tidbits include rumors of miniature flags hidden in river reeds, signaling troop movements, a premodern, low-tech messaging system with deadly potential. And there's a psychological component. Observation is exhausting, mentally and physically. Shadow warriors learned patience through monotony, enduring hours of rain or cold, blending into the background until the slightest opportunity emerged. You trudge through that reality, imagining frozen nights spent crouched behind walls, hearts pounding in sync with distant lanterns. humor crept in subtly. Some trainers would secretly swap disguises or props to test vigilance, like placing a wooden frog in a basket to see if it drew attention. These lessons were simultaneously practical and whimsical, reinforcing alertness while challenging complacency. By the time you step into the dim light of a distant village gate, the essence of espionage feels alive. It's not flashy. It's patient. It's intelligent. You probably won't survive a full day without exhausting every nerve in your body. But tonight, in this narrative, you walk beside the hidden eyes and ears of feudal Japan. You sense how essential intelligence was to survival, how ordinary life became a theater for observation, and how shadows could conceal not just bodies, but entire networks of knowledge, power, and intrigue. Rain slicks the wooden roof tiles as you crouch low, the village below flickering with lantern light, and you trudge into the heart of assassination and stealth tactics. This is the realm where shadow warriors earned their fearsome reputation, though not always in the dramatic, cinematic sense you might imagine. Assassinations were surgical, precise, and calculated. Most were more about disruption than spectacle. You probably won't survive picturing yourself balancing on slippery eaves, dagger in hand, but that's exactly the kind of terrain where these warriors thrived. Historians still argue whether such missions were routine assignments or exceptional, high-risk tasks reserved for the most skilled operatives. You imagine moving through an enemy stronghold at night, a roofline your highway, shadows your allies, and every creak a potential death sentence. Fringe accounts describe shinobi using trained animals, like geese or cats, to carry messages or deliver small tools, blending espionage and assassination in ways that seem whimsical but were surprisingly effective. Picture a bird dropping a tiny scroll into a courtyard, completely unnoticed, and you begin to understand that stealth wasn't just movement, it was creativity, improvisation, and patience distilled into action. Weapons here are minimal and often disguised. A small dagger in your boot, a poisoned hairpin, or a cleverly weighted shuriken could achieve more than a full-length sword. The element of surprise was paramount, and shadow warriors learned to exploit natural sounds, weather, and human routines to their advantage. A sudden gust might cover footsteps. A passing dog might mask a whisper. You probably won't survive imagining the mental calculations involved, but every detail mattered. Timing, trajectory, and anticipation. There's also the art of psychological warfare. Silence is terrifying when expected noise dominates, and the mere suggestion that someone could strike without warning caused panic disproportionate to actual danger. Quirky Fringe reports mention ninja leaving subtle signs of their presence, a moved object, a mark on a wall to unnerve and mislead opponents. It's less about killing and more about control, shaping fear in ways that allowed missions to succeed with minimal confrontation. You trudge past corridors and courtyards, feeling the rhythm of this hidden life, observation, infiltration, and when necessary, precise strikes. You probably won't survive long imagining the combination of patience, nerves, and dexterity required, but in doing so, you grasp why these warriors became legends. Every move is calculated, every shadow a potential ally, every step a testament to skill honed in secrecy. By the time you descend from rooftops to the quiet riverbank below, you begin to appreciate the subtle mastery of these tactics. Stealth isn't just hiding, it's anticipation, creativity, and exploiting both environment and psychology. You feel the pulse of missions completed without notice. Victories measured not in applause, but in lives and information preserved. Historians still argue about the prevalence of these feats versus legend, but tonight, as you trudge through this narrative, you're walking the line between myth and mastery, a silent participant in a hidden world where every shadow matters. You trudge into a dimly lit theater, the smell of ink and wood smoke hanging in the air, and suddenly the shadow warriors seem almost playful. Welcome to the world of ninja in popular culture, where reality and imagination blur, and the stories of hidden operatives become legends, stage props, and eventually video game avatars. You probably won't survive separating historical fact from fiction in one sitting, but that's part of the fun. Seeing how a covert operative became a symbol of mystery, cunning, and coolness that stretches centuries. Historians still argue how much of what we think we know about ninja comes from factual accounts versus theatrical embellishment. Kabuki theater and woodblock prints played an enormous role in shaping the popular image of ninja. You imagine actors leaping across miniature stage rooftops, robes flaring, faces painted white, performing feats that real shinobi might never attempt. Fringe sources even suggest some tales of magic powders, invisibility, or walking on water were theater tricks misattributed to historical ninja. You might smirk, thinking of your favorite ninja movie, but this is where legend begins to take root, where the shadows get colorful, dramatic, and sometimes ridiculous. Then there's literature, pamphlets, and even manuals written to entertain rather than instruct. Ninja manuals like the Bansen Shukai outline tactics, philosophy, and codes, but when filtered through centuries of storytelling, the line between pragmatic advice and creative storytelling blurs. You probably won't survive all the imaginative exaggerations without a headache, but each embellishment reveals society's fascination with secrecy, cleverness, and danger. Modern pop culture didn't invent these exaggerations, it amplified them. Comic books, movies, video games, and cosplay have turned ninja into icons of agility, mystery, and supernatural skill. You trudge through a mental map of digital rooftops, shurikens spinning in slow motion, and realize the contrast with historical reality is enormous. Real shadow warriors relied on patience, observation, and ingenuity, not impossible acrobatics or magical powders. Yet the appeal persists because the essence of stealth, cunning, and unpredictability remains relatable. Fringe tidbits continue to color the narrative. Some 19th century kabuki plays describe ninja using puppets or smoke bombs in ways that seem preposterous, yet hint at the playful nature of legend. You probably won't survive absorbing every distortion and truth in one mental sweep, but recognizing the blend of fact and fiction enhances your appreciation. Historians still debate how much these cultural portrayals shaped public perception versus reflecting actual history. By the time you step back into the night, leaving the echo of theater behind, you begin to see the full arc, from silent, disciplined operatives moving through forests and villages, to legendary figures leaping across imagination and media. Shadows become stories, and stories become myths, yet the underlying fascination endures. You feel the pulse of centuries of secrecy, skill, and storytelling merging, reminding you that the ninja isn't just a historical figure, they're an enduring symbol, a whisper in every corner of both past and present. You trudge along a winding mountain path, mist curling like smoke around your ankles, and you begin to meet the notable shadow operatives of history, those whose exploits teeter between legend and reality. Famous clans such as the Iga and Koga produced individuals whose names were whispered in fear and admiration alike. You probably won't survive imagining yourself keeping pace with these elusive figures. Yet tonight, in this narrative, you walk alongside them, feeling the rhythm of calculated steps, quiet breaths, and minds always 3 moves ahead. Historians still question the accuracy of many tales, debating whether particular exploits were actual missions or embellishments meant to entertain or intimidate. One tale tells of a ninja who infiltrated a heavily guarded castle disguised as a monk, carrying not a weapon, but a bag of carefully folded straw mats. The clever ruse allowed him to pass through multiple checkpoints, moving as part of the background, unseen and unchallenged. Fringe accounts claim he left tiny coded symbols etched into floorboards to guide all eyes later, a miniature, invisible breadcrumb trail. You might chuckle at the ingenuity, imagining a monk casually tiptoeing past guards, but it captures the essence of the shadow warrior: creativity, patience, and cunning rather than brute force. Other accounts describe daring escapes and infiltration feats, such as scaling walls under moonlight, slipping through secret tunnels, or mimicking the behavior of animals to evade detection. These stories blur the line between skill and near magical ability, and you probably won't survive imagining the perfect balance, timing, and nerve required. The combination of observation, environmental knowledge, and improvisation allowed shadow operatives to manipulate both space and perception. Historians still argue which accounts reflect authentic missions and which are narrative flourishes intended to inspire awe or fear. Then there are the quirky anecdotes. One ninja reportedly carried a small musical instrument to blend into festival crowds, using it to signal allies while remaining inconspicuous. Another supposedly disguised himself as a traveling cook, delivering secret messages hidden inside food containers. These stories, odd as they seem, reveal a central principle: the genius of adaptation. Shadow warriors made the mundane extraordinary, turning everyday objects and routines into instruments of strategy. By the time you trudge past overgrown castle gates and moss-covered walls, you begin to sense the rhythm of history itself. Each story of a notable operative, whether verified or exaggerated, reflects a mindset of vigilance, intelligence, and audacious subtlety. You probably won't survive grasping all the nuance in a single night, but you feel it in the shadows, the pulse of genius in obscurity, the thrill of movements unseen, and the quiet mastery that turned ordinary terrain into a stage for extraordinary feats. These operatives, hidden from public record, yet alive in whispers and scrolls, shape your mental map of what a shadow warrior truly embodied: patience, skill, and the art of disappearing entirely while influencing everything around them. You trudge along a narrow forest path, branches brushing your shoulders, and your mind turns to women in the shadows' female ninja, or konoichi, whose stories are rarer but no less fascinating. They didn't wield swords openly or parade in armor. Instead, their power lay in subterfuge, intelligence gathering, and the subtle arts of seduction and disguise. You probably won't survive imagining the mental agility required to balance charm, observation, and danger. But in this world, a whisper or a glance could be as lethal as any blade. Historians still debate how widespread women's participation in covert operations really was, with some arguing their presence was significant, while others suggest legend inflated their roles. Picture yourself watching a konoichi move through a bustling marketplace, blending seamlessly among merchants, shoppers, and children. Every movement is deliberate, every gesture calculated. Fringe accounts claim that some used cats to deliver messages, small and silent, slipping through narrow gaps that humans could not traverse. You might laugh at the image of a feline courier in a tiny backpack, but the principle is clear. Adaptability and creativity defined their missions. These women mastered observation, memory, and improvisation, turning everyday tasks into intelligence operations. Training for female shadow warriors paralleled their male counterparts, but often emphasized social infiltration, escape routes, and psychological manipulation. They learned to read people as keenly as they read the environment, anticipating reactions and exploiting weaknesses. You probably won't survive the sheer complexity of combining martial skill with social cunning. Yet it highlights a central truth. In espionage, brains often outweighed brawn. Historians still argue about the accuracy of romanticized tales portraying kunoichi as seductive assassins, but the repeated references across manuscripts suggest a kernel of truth. Quirky anecdotes abound. One story describes a woman ninja disguising herself as a traveling nurse, carrying medicinal herbs while secretly passing information to allied clans. Another supposedly hid coded messages inside fans, which were then fanned casually in the presence of unsuspecting lords. You can't help but admire the ingenuity, and probably won. Survive imagining the mental dexterity required to perform these dual roles flawlessly under constant risk. By the time you reach the forest edge, the presence of these women in the shadows feels palpable. They embody a balance of patience, intelligence, and adaptability that complements the broader world of shinobi. You probably won't survive fully internalizing their contributions in one night, but you sense their quiet impact, infiltrating, observing, and shaping events without leaving a trace. They remind you that shadow warriors were not just warriors. They were masters of perception, strategy, and subtle influence, proving that power and secrecy often outweighed power and visibility. You trudge deeper into a bamboo grove, leaves slick with rain, and your eyes catch glimpses of shapes that might be trees, or they might be traps. Here, tools of disguise dominate, and the shadow warriors reveal their mastery over perception itself. Every item, every gesture, even the rhythm of footsteps could be weaponized or masked. You probably want to survive, imagining yourself blending so thoroughly into surroundings that even the wind seems to hesitate around you. But that's exactly what these masters of concealment perfected. Historians still argue whether the elaborate disguises described in scrolls were standard practice or the product of myth-making by later storytellers. You see the artistry in disguises. A merchant carrying bundles, a wandering priest, a traveling entertainer, or even the audacious corpse impersonation designed to infiltrate mausoleums or enemy camps. Fringe anecdotes describe ninja disguising themselves as trees or statues, with just enough motion to breathe life without arousing suspicion. You might chuckle imagining someone frozen in a shrine for hours, but the technique was practical. The mind overlooks what seems stationary and unthreatening. These methods required patience, observation, and a deep understanding of human perception. Every disguise carried psychological and tactical layers. A humble entertainer could gather intelligence unnoticed, while a corpse mask could terrify and disorient opponents. You probably won't survive appreciating the level of preparation involved. How hair, clothing, gait, and even smell were calibrated to avoid detection, but these details were crucial. Historians still debate the prevalence of extreme tactics like corpse impersonation, weighing whether the accounts reflect reality or the human love of sensational storytelling. Quirky tidbits abound. Some ninja reportedly used tree bark masks or clay face molds to mimic villagers or statues, and certain manuals suggest the careful timing of eye contact to manipulate suspicion. These devices weren't merely theatrical, they were extensions of psychological warfare, turning ordinary materials into instruments of strategy. You trudge through this reality, imagining the meticulous attention required to maintain a false identity under observation for hours or even days. By the time you emerge from the grove, the art of disguise feels like second nature to you in spirit. Shadow warriors transformed every ordinary item into a potential camouflage, every environment into a stage for subtle mastery. You probably won't survive absorbing all the creativity and discipline in one sitting, yet you feel the essence. Invisibility was more than absence. It was control, cunning, and the silent assertion that perception itself could be manipulated. In this hidden world, every mask, cloak, and gesture mattered, and the shadows were alive with calculated intent, waiting for the unwary to stumble into a master's invisible plan. You trudge along a fog-laden riverbank, the scent of wet earth and moss filling your lungs, and you begin to sense the operational genius of the shadow warriors, how they moved not just with stealth, but with strategy, timing, and often patience rivaling the river itself. Missions weren't impulsive acts of bravery. They were meticulously planned operations, with routes, contingencies, and signals synchronized down to the smallest detail. You probably won't survive, imagining the hours spent mapping terrain in silence. Yet it's in this precision that their true power emerges. Historians still argue whether the complex operations described in ancient texts reflect real missions or idealized constructs of tactical imagination. Visualize crossing a narrow bridge at midnight, every plank a potential alarm, while allies signal from the far shore with subtle gestures. A bird landing here, a stone tossed there. Fringe accounts suggest some missions used coded lanterns to coordinate timing, with each flicker conveying precise instructions across yards of empty darkness. You might chuckle at the theatricality, imagining a secret Morse code with lantern light, yet the principle is sound. Communication without revealing presence was essential. Tactics extended beyond infiltration. Diversions were as important as direct action. Imagine setting a minor fire downwind to draw guards away, or orchestrating a loud argument to mask movement elsewhere. You probably won't survive internalizing the coordination and improvisation required, but these techniques reveal the intelligence behind the shadow warriors. Every action, no matter how small, was calculated to maximize impact and minimize exposure. Historians still debate how much of the legendary miracle escapes involved actual skill versus luck and embellishment, but the repetition of such accounts suggests consistent methods rather than pure storytelling. Then there's the remarkable adaptability. The environment itself became a partner in operations. Dense fog, flowing rivers, and the shifting seasons were allies. Fringe anecdotes claim that some ninja used powdered herbs to mask their scent from tracking dogs, or studied the behavior of local wildlife to avoid detection. You probably won't survive grasping the subtle interplay between nature and technique, but it emphasizes the ingenuity of their craft. By the time you reach a small clearing where moonlight dances on the river's surface, you feel the rhythm of strategic patience. Shadow warriors transformed observation, timing, and improvisation into an art form. You probably won't survive fully imagining the constant calculations running through their minds, yet you sense it. Every ripple, every flicker of movement, every breath could be part of a larger operation. In this quiet, you recognize that the true mastery of the shinobi was not in combat alone, but in orchestrating events invisibly, bending both people and circumstances to their will while leaving no trace behind. You trudge through the narrow, fog-drenched streets of a feudal town, lanterns flickering in the wet night, and suddenly the importance of secrecy crystallizes in a new way. The shinobi weren't just hiding from enemies. They were shaping outcomes, influencing politics, and subtly steering the flow of events. You probably won't survive imagining the level of subtle manipulation required, but each observation, message, or minor sabotage could ripple outward, altering the balance of power. Historians still argue whether their influence was decisive in major conflicts or largely confined to localized skirmishes and espionage missions. Picture yourself in the shadow of a castle wall, watching officials move like predictable pieces on a board. A well-placed rumor, a stolen letter, or a rearranged supply route could tilt favor toward one lord over another. Fringe accounts describe ninja who disguised themselves as servants or merchants, influencing decisions not by force, but by information and timing. You might smirk at the theater of it, imagining a tiny puppet master nudging history along with a whisper. Yet these were practical applications of stealth and cunning. Beyond political maneuvering, shadow warriors also disrupted supply lines, intercepted intelligence, and protected allies with quiet, unseen interventions. You probably won't survive absorbing all the subtle strategies in a single sweep, but they relied on patience and foresight rather than dramatic combat. A message delivered undetected, a minor sabotage at the right time, or a carefully timed diversion could save lives or change the course of a campaign. Historians still debate the scale and frequency of these interventions, but the consistency of references across clans suggests their strategic role was meaningful. Quirky tidbits abound. Some accounts describe ninja subtly altering ceremonial arrangements, swapping banners, or adjusting seating positions to confuse rivals. Others supposedly inserted coded messages into poetry or gift packages, everyday interactions becoming instruments of strategy. You probably won't survive imagining all the creativity involved, but it highlights a recurring theme: the mastery of indirect influence. By the time you trudge past quiet houses and shuttered windows, you start to appreciate the breadth of the shinobi's subtle power. Stealth wasn't just concealment. It was control over perception, timing, and influence. You probably won't survive the mental mapping required to keep track of all these layers. But tonight, in this narrative, you feel the invisible threads stretching across towns and valleys, a web of influence spun by shadows. The shinobi weren't just fighters, they were orchestrators, engineers of unseen outcomes, and quiet architects of a history shaped as much by patience as by blade. You trudge along a forested ridge as dawn-light begins to filter through misty pines, and the theme of legacy comes into focus. The shadow warriors didn't vanish with the end of feudal conflicts. Instead, their skills, tactics, and philosophy seeped into culture, folklore, and even modern military strategy. You probably won't survive imagining the centuries-long ripple of influence, but from espionage manuals to kabuki plays, their methods and myths persisted. Historians still argue how much of modern ninja lore is historically accurate versus reconstructed or exaggerated for cultural fascination. Think about how the principles of patience, observation, and adaptability move beyond weaponry. Samurai warlords and later governments reportedly consulted surviving shinobi for intelligence and covert operations, a bridge between shadowy past and emerging political landscapes. Fringe accounts even suggest that some ninjutsu techniques influenced the development of modern martial arts, espionage tactics, and unconventional warfare strategies. You might laugh picturing a shadow warrior teaching boardroom spies centuries later, but the underlying mindset, ingenuity, deception, and subtle control remains relevant. Cultural impact is equally fascinating. You trudge through stories embedded in woodblock prints, novels, and theater performances, where exaggerated feats of invisibility, agility, and cunning thrilled audiences. Some historical texts hinted real missions, but creative reinterpretation turned them into larger-than-life heroes. You probably won't survive untangling fact from fiction completely, yet both strands, history and myth, offer insight into human fascination with stealth, intelligence, and audacity. Historians still debate the extent to which entertainment distorted reality, but the cultural imprint is undeniable. Quirky legacies persist. Some modern martial arts schools maintain rituals or techniques tracing back to shinobi methods, and even garden design or survival training in Japan occasionally incorporates their strategic thinking. You probably won't survive picturing all these threads converging, yet the continuity is remarkable. From shadowed forests to pop culture, these lessons echo. Intelligence, patience, and subtlety can be as powerful as swords or armies. By the time you reach the valley floor, the weight of history and myth rests lightly in your mind. You sense the resonance of skill, ingenuity, and stealth across generations, a living legacy that survives in stories, culture, and imagination. You probably won't survive fully absorbing all of it at once, but the essence is clear. Shadow warriors shaped their world in silence, and that quiet mastery continues to whisper through the ages. You trudge along a quiet, fog-drenched path as evening settles, and the full picture of the shadow warriors crystallizes in your mind. A life of discipline, secrecy, ingenuity, and relentless adaptation. Every forest, alley, and village you've imagined feels alive with the echoes of their footsteps. You probably won't survive internalizing the constant vigilance required, but walking through this narrative, you sense the pulse of centuries of hidden mastery. Historians still debate the accuracy of some tales, but the consistency of recurring principles, stealth, intelligence, patience underscores the reality beneath legend. Recall the grueling training, barefoot in rivers, balancing on logs, meditating in darkness. Every exercise honed endurance, concentration, and mental resilience. The fringe elements, beds of nails, incense exercises, or snake pits sound absurd, yet they reveal the lengths to which these warriors went to survive unpredictable, dangerous missions. Weapons, both conventional and disguised, were extensions of strategy, not spectacle. Shuriken distracted, daggers concealed, even everyday items became lethal or informative. You probably won't survive imagining all the combinations, yet each innovation speaks to adaptability. Consider the operatives themselves, male and female, masters of disguise, observation, and improvisation. Kunoichi maneuvered through social spaces with intelligence and subtlety, while male ninja mapped terrain, manipulated perception, and executed precise interventions. Operations relied on timing, environmental knowledge, psychological insight, and patience, often altering the course of battles or influencing politics invisibly. Quirky tactics, coded lanterns, disguised animals, hidden messages highlight their creativity. You probably won't survive grasping the full mental complexity, yet the elegance of their methods is undeniable. Even as legends amplified their exploits through kabuki, prints, and literature, the essence remained: skill in shadows, control of perception, and strategic influence. Modern interpretations, from martial arts to pop culture, continue to celebrate these principles, though often exaggerated. Fringe anecdotes, like corpse disguises or bird couriers, blur fact and fiction, but they illustrate a mindset where creativity, patience, and intelligence outweigh brute force. Historians still argue about what was real, but the philosophical and tactical lessons endure. By the time you trudge out of the misty woods, you feel the quiet mastery of the shadow warriors resonate within you. You probably won't survive a day in their lives, yet their legacy whispers in every silent observation, patient calculation, and subtle act of influence. They remind us that true power often moves unseen, shaping outcomes, altering perceptions, and surviving across centuries, long after the swords have rusted and the scrolls have faded. Now let your pace slow, your breathing lengthen, and your mind drift along the quiet paths of centuries past. The misty forests, lantern